Today's program is going to be about COVID-19. Although we are right in the pandemic at the moment, but there is certainly going to be an aftershock. As much as COVID-19 has exposed the persistence of systemic and unabated anti-Black inequality in Boston society, it has also exposed deep fissures within the city's Black leadership class and its inability to qualitatively and quantitatively respond to the ostensible misery being faced by the poor and the vulnerable. This much is true by any and all objectives, empirical measures, Black life in Boston, when compared to white life. It's undervalued and disrespected. The gulf that exists between Black lives and whites in the city is vast and immeasurable. The chasm speaks not only to institutional animus against Black human flourishing, but to matters of concern, empathy, and organizations within the Black community itself. While Black grievance against white power structures in Boston is appropriate, so is a full critics and honest assessment of Black leadership. Does Black leadership love deeply and sacrificially in the interest of its own survival? This assessment requires caucusing among Black leadership and the elites within this community. It requires reimagining the Black community as a spiritual and material better place. It means fostering a Black reconstruction of civil society in Boston. Only true love can realize this. With the words of Kevin Peterson, victory is assured. And I do believe the same way also. This is why we are welcoming two of our guests today into this program. Nika Elugardo, who is a state rep in the city of Boston, and Julia Mejia, who is the city councilor at large. Both of them have been recently into office, and I think they still have a good sense of what their constituent is looking for, and as well as being a part of the system as well. So we want to welcome them, and you all stay tuned because we're going to have so much to talk about in regards to the work that's to be done. We must do better into our community, and how can we ameliorate lives for the most vulnerable in the days to come. COVID-19, you are already facing difficulties right now with your constituents. What kind of a plan of measure that you think we can put forth so that we don't become victim of second times again afterwards?
I think, I don't know if you heard, but I said there was a lot in that email that was addressed. And, you know, and there's a lot that I agree with in terms of just the state of Black America and Black just Black in general here in the city of Boston. And to Nika, from both Nika and I, we've only been in office for less than 2 years. Nika won her seat last year, and I just won my seat this year. And so we've inherited a lot of the problems that we are addressing, right? And I think that we ran to try to change the way we do business in Boston because we knew that the voices of the people who were living these realities from a profound place were not being heard. And just because you happen to be Black or brown doesn't necessarily mean that you understand the struggle of Black or brown unless you've lived it in many ways, right? So this is what I believe the new generation of leadership that's coming into the space is able to really bring that profound lived experience, which is what I believe has been missing from a lot of the spaces, which is what Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley talks about, those who are closest to the pain should be closer to the power. You know, we're now in a place in the city of Boston where we're seeing a different level of leadership and people in positions to be able to move the conversation forward. And I think what happens from here on is what
Hmm.
we should be measured on in terms of real progress. What has happened before us, because there's been a lot of leaders who saved for us, King, Sarah Ann Shaw, Charlotte Gola Ritchie, Marie St.
Richard, right?
LaFleur,
Hmm.
Linda Dorfini Ford, you know, Richie. You know, there's been a lot of people who were in positions of power before us who set the space and the stage for us to be able to lead. But we've never had an opportunity to have representation from the federal, the state, and the local level. This is the first time in our history where we have someone who is now in the federal space representing us. So I do believe that we're getting closer to really being able to shift political power in Boston by having different levels of government and representation in all those spaces. And then in terms of going back, Jean, I'm gonna be honest with you. These issues that we're talking about, it's not like COVID exposed them, because everybody here in
Oh,
this
of course,
call and
yeah,
who's ever listening knew these things were already part of the problem. What COVID has done
true.
is given us an opportunity to talk about what are we going to do moving forward, because we're not going back to the way things used to be. The question is how we're going to move forward, knowing what we know and what we should be doing to help
Hmm.
alleviate a lot of the stressors that people who are living in this community face. That is where I feel the energy is. It's like, how do we move in a way that makes sense? And so that means making sure that we're supporting small businesses, Black and brown and minority owned and immigrant owned businesses in the city of Boston to help them thrive beyond COVID. It means making sure
Hmm.
that our young people who have lost learning through the education system because they've had to be in working and learning from home, how do we make up that loss, right? How do we ensure that we're working in the housing space and people who are still going to be feeling behind when we go back to work? What systems are we putting in place to providing a little bit of cushion to support people financially to get back on their feet when things go back? So there's a lot that needs to happen, but it has to,
Oh,
the conversation has
there is so much. I think
to start.
we can only probably just touch on the most important ones. But there are uh, COVID-19 for me has just demonstrated one thing. It was like it was a bleeding that was being patched all along, and today we lift up the bandage and we want to make sure that we bring some cure to it. Nika.
Thank you, Julia. Well said as always. And thank you again, Jean-Claude, for having me. Before we dive so deep in, I want to just take a moment to acknowledge what is heavy on all of our hearts of yet another public lynching of a fellow Black brother or sister in George Floyd. And I say public because, to Julia's point, this is not new for us. The cameras are new. And so that does present an opportunity. And COVID is like a camera. It takes a snapshot of the thing that the people experiencing it all the time can hear and feel and know. But the people who have the privilege of turning a blind eye or not even ever encountering the types of oppression, whether it be economic, education, the criminalizing system, any form of justice, housing justice, healthcare justice, and since the foundations of our country, people who are poor, people who are Black, people who are brown, and anybody else who comes up who is new or different than the elite mainstream, whether that be LGBTQ or whatnot, or especially intersections of those, right? Any Black person that is any of those other things, you know, um, we have been. I don't like the phrase silenced
That's
because
right.
we have been speaking from the beginning. We have been unheard. And what happens with people like my sister Julia, for example, is that rather than being unheard, the voices are amplified. And that is what we're doing. And it can be discouraging because an amplified voice is not enough for change. It is just one step in making sure that the problems get framed through our own stories and the solutions get framed through our own experiences and our leadership. But COVID has underscored one thing for me more than any other, and that is we need our people in the very top positions in the executive, in the courts, and in the legislature, at the city level and the state level, as well as at the federal level. And so Ayanna is making her way up there, leading the way. I call her our Jupiter because I feel like a lot of the ladies that got elected in the last couple of years are like planetary forces, and she's like the big one that I feel like a lot of us look up to even before. Even though I'm older than her, I look up to her. I look up to Julia too. And these interstellar forces are in the sky, but it's the people that are on the ground. And the people have to remember that we cannot allow our discouragement to slow us down. We have to remember what we have accomplished. And honestly, just to put it flat, until the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, the governor, the mayor, until these people have the shared lived experiences that Julia was talking about, we will see major and continued expansion of the various oppressive opportunity gaps that have been listed and more that we all know. And it's very frustrating in a time like this as a legislator on the state side for my strongest tool to be writing letters to the governor. Like I don't have his cell phone, right? I can't call him up. And if I could, because a couple legislators do, he'll take it under advisement, but it's like holding court. You know, this reopening advisory board, you know, they had a nice guy from that board come on and answer the question on a legislator call. Well, why isn't it representative? Why don't you have more immigrant businesses, even nurses, even teachers, essential workers, direct care providers, low wage workers? How come none of these people are on the advisory board? And this is not to him, this is to the governor. He's the one that set it up. But his answer when they put him out there was, "Oh, we're listening to everyone." And you're not a monarch. You know how they hold court in the movies about kings, where they sit in their throne and people come in and they express their grievance and the king gives an edict and then they go forth having to accept whatever the edict has been. Does that sound like a democracy? No, they don't
It
understand
is not.
what it means. Almost everybody wants to get all goosebumpy when Ayanna and others talk about the power needs to be with the seat of the people who are experiencing the pain. But what does that mean if this is the power right here? Let's see, where's this? The screen is not normal for me. Okay, this is the power in my hand, right? Now, if I'm not feeling the pain and the power is here in my hand, what do I have to do if, let's say, Julia's feeling the pain and she puts her hand out there, it's empty, right? What do we have to do with her empty hand? We have to fill it. I have to open my hand, let go of power, and give it to Julia. That means you either get out of the way or you appoint these people to your top positions and then you do what they say. And when we talk about that type of power, for us, it's always shared power. I don't mean for every single person of color. Obviously, we've addressed that. but for those of us who are here, you know, trying to have sacrificed careers that both of us I know and most of the people of color I know, all of the ones I know who are elected officials could be making almost twice as much or more and hold up somewhere in a nice place, you know, whatever. We could be doing stuff. But this is what we want to do and have always done before we were elected, is serve the community. That type of leader always brings shared power. So if you're asking me what to do, I have asked 100 people, literally, by asking the 10 people who know, the essential workers, the labor organizers, the immigrant organizers, and I told them not what, give me your advice so I can consider it. I've told them, tell me what to do. You know what needs to be done. And so we have that type of information. And as much as I believe that Marty Walsh is doing much better than our governor, and our governor is doing much better than our president, the bar is just way too low for the whole situation. And so if we want to get into
All right.
details of what better would look like, but that framework is important, and that framework is not going to change. COVID is not over. There's no after COVID for at least 2-3 years, because we're not going to have a
Mm-hmm.
vaccine for at least a year and a half, and then it'll take a long time to get that thing deployed. And so our people are going to be vulnerable for like half a decade at least, directly vulnerable financially and health wise.
Right.
And so we got to work during that whole time to get our folks up into the higher echelons of leadership.
Ladies, I'm going to get into an issue which I think has been into the political arena for quite some time, and it's being brought so much by Bernie Sanders in terms of inequality within our society. If you look at COVID-19, we are being victimized 77 times percent more than anybody else. That is one. But one element that I do believe that could certainly change and shift things around, it's that 1%er who has control over the wealth of this whole entire nation. And in the meantime, folks are dying of hunger, poverty, crime, and so on and so forth. All they have to do is to release the distribution of that wealth, and that will resolve a lot of the problem. I know normally when we are coming into office as elected official, we come in as constituents sending us in. But once we are in, also, it seems like there's a certain amount of control being put on the elected officials, not to do the will of the people, but to do the will of those who are in power with the money, who is directing things. How do we take our strength by saying enough is enough? In this day and age, there's enough wealth in this city so that we don't talk about poverty anymore, so that we don't talk about health disparity, so that we don't talk about housing, so that we don't talk about equal educations for all, and so on and so forth. And even, there goes my biggest frustrations, and I need you to address this for me. When we are calling essential workers, there's a tendency in the media to talk about nurses and doctors. But in reality, it's a lot more than that. These people, how do we lift them up? Not just calling them heroes, but also giving them the power so that they can continue striving and make life better for themselves. Because eventually, after COVID-19 is gone, they're going to become voiceless.
Nika, you want to go first this time?
Okay. Well, I think it's important for us as leaders, especially that there aren't very many of us in the State House. There are 13 Black and Latinos out of 200 legislators. In the Senate, there's only one, Senator Sonia Chang Diaz, and there's 12 of us on the other side. We gotta look at the problem and the solution at the concrete level on the ground, all the way up to the big picture. So concretely, for essential workers, we need to pass legislation, which has been filed, that will give them hazard pay, which some workers have gotten, like state workers, but other even direct care providers who are working in DSS, with social services, working DYS, working with DDS, they do not have hazard pay. Their lives are at risk. And then the other thing, we need a lot of low wage workers, essential workers and returning workers right now, do not have enough or any, in many cases, paid sick leave. It's emergency paid sick leave. So the federal government provided that for a number of workers, but not for all. There's legislation to fill in that gap. We also need to make sure that immigrants that aren't documented, that their tax dollars are being put to the same work everybody else's tax dollars are being put to, and making sure that they're provided with both stimulus payments and ongoing recovery payments, as were provided for through unemployment insurance for other Americans. But those Americans were not included. Our brothers and sisters that don't have documents, regardless of whether they might have refugee status or whatever it might be, should we have a more just government than we do, which doesn't really matter. Your tax dollars should not be, you're working hard, you're paying taxes, and those taxes are funding everybody else's recovery. that should be unjust to Republicans as well as to Democrats. I don't care if you're progressive, socialist, libertarian. If somebody's paying tax dollars, when they get down and out because of a national crisis, their tax dollars should not pay for everybody else's recovery. So these are some of the baselines. And then we also, for small businesses, everybody knows, and Julia is the emerging expert on this as the small business chair at the city level, and has already done some amazing work through a pilot and some other work to make sure that the unjust infrastructure that is set up to benefit first the billionaire class, then the millionaire class, then well-connected white people, then well-connected people of color, and then people that have successful businesses because of the knit and grit of their own down and dirty work that they did without any capital, without any institutional support. Though they may have worked 5, 10, 20 times harder, they have no access or very limited access to the federal aid. And then the city aid that is being put forth still has some gaps in accessibility. And the thing, everybody works so hard first on the top. And time to figure out, it takes time to hear from our immigrant voices. It takes time to talk to the Black men about what they're going to do when they're not allowed because because they came out of a jail on a felony charge, did their not in Section 8 housing. Why don't we have time for the emergencies that affect our people? If those things could be solved just as quickly as Amazon's problems got solved. They could be solved just as quickly as the Associated Industry of Massachusetts members' businesses got solved. They could be solved just as quickly as middle-class, high-educated people like myself. I hardly had any problems because I was connected. And people like Julia, myself, and you, Jean-Claude, we try to share that, but we're not yet in the institution at the level where we can just make an executive order. That's who's not doing it. So we can't lose sight of that. We have to maintain unity around that. So like even the Black and Latino caucus is on the governor, around data, about racial injustice, not only in health disparities, but also other disparities and other things. But it's so important that we get out of the habit of making a passive request like, this problem needs to be solved, and we're asking you to do these 2-3 policies. We need to say, and I think we are in the recent letter that we have been drafting this point out, we are calling on you to present your plan to us for addressing the challenge of structural racism. And we need to go further and explain to him what that is, because he doesn't even know. And he's not going to get it. But the more we call it out like that, the more power we have at the next election to say to people, wake up. What do you mean, favorable ratings? What does that mean to you? You know what I'm saying? So whether we're talking about the specific policies, and I've co-signed about 90 bills at the State House that are COVID response bills. Probably almost half of them are directly targeted at our communities. And the rest are broad across everybody. I mean, all of them are broad, but our communities are experiencing the hazard pay, for example, more, and access to mass health and that kind of stuff. And only a tiny handful of them have even left the committee because that urgency is not there at the level of the committee leaders. Do you know how many of the members of the Black and Latino caucus on the House side, the 12 of us, are chairs of a committee?
No.
Pick a number from 0 to 12.
I would say 6. 0
is the number. And people want to know why we can't get stuff moved through the committees. There's all kinds of stuff we do to mobilize. Like I was active with Mike Connolly on the moratorium on commercial and residential evictions and the moratorium on foreclosure. Do you know how many backflips we had to do? And relational gymnastics, and how many hundreds, literally hundreds, of advocates and renters were organizing and had already been organizing to get that done, just to move one very obvious bill that should have been passed within 2-3 weeks. Right? You know how fast that would have been if one of us was the chair? It would have happened in faster than 3 weeks. and then it would have been on the speaker to move it,
So
and then we would have been out there
right.
being loud. So we got to be real about this stuff. We got to be real about it. It's discouraging constantly to be
Mm-hmm.
in an environment where you have to be not only bringing the power and the voice of your people, educating people to think they already know, and then navigating this power structure that doesn't really welcome new people, let alone people that look or think differently. And I'm up for it,
Exactly.
and Julia's up for it. But when we come back into the community, what we don't need to hear is, y'all ain't there for us if you have spoken to us and we can answer those questions. Now it's different. There are some people that, under the weight of the discouragement, maybe they stop doing stuff. But I can tell you, not a single Boston elected of color is in that position today.
Mm-hmm.
They are all, because we
Well,
meet regularly, they're working hard.
Yeah.
right. I want
Could
to
I?
throw Julia in, but I just want to insist on the fact that there is a disconnect. If you remember the struggle of the 60s, somewhere along the line, we've become so complacent, the next generations, and therefore we didn't continue with that struggle. I think one of the lessons that we're going to learn from COVID-19 is that we need to continue speaking up and acting up also against the power to be. Because if we are continuously becoming a complacent group of people, well, they're going to say, here, look at them. You know, it's just they get upset about this today and they cool off tomorrow. So there is no consistency, and that's the thing that we need to continue with, is that consistency of the struggle and the fight. Julia?
Yeah. So, um, this is why I love being on a panel with my sister in service, Nika, because we just are cut from the same cloth and we're speaking the same truth and holding the same people accountable. And that is disheartening to hear, that we don't have any representation who have a position of chairmanship on the state level. I didn't even know that. That is
Well,
heart.
Sonia does, but not in the House.
Not in the House. I know. I'm just saying, like, that's just crazy to me. And Sonia had a big role, and they took that away from her too. So there's a lot of politics. But in the city government,
Oh,
we're lucky now
I know
that.
it. I know what you mean. They can spank one of us while you are in there if you're not acting the way the whole crew is acting, because they've done that
Yeah,
before. Yes, go ahead.
yeah. So it just makes me sad. But it's also really about us recognizing this moment in time and how crucial it is and how we act. And this is what's going to change the game. I really do believe that we have a small window right now that we're all going to have to climb through to really shift the way we do business. But to go back to the essential workers, John, one of the things that we've been talking about is, you're right. It's not just doctors and nurses with the way that you see it on television. When we talk about essential workers, it's also the people who are working in our supermarkets. It's people who are working as receptionists in these hospitals, right? It's people who are drawing the blood. It's people who are working and cleaning our offices and cleaning these hospitals, right? Like, essential workers right now are the ones who are holding it down for all of us. And most of the folks who are in these front lines are immigrant, are people of color, are low income, and always fighting for paid family leave, and always just fighting for every single little benefit that is owed to them, right? So for them now to be in a position to be taking care of us, literally saving us on these front lines, and yet we still continue to disregard them, which is on the local level too. We're supporting the bill that Nika mentioned earlier about the hazardous pay. We held a hearing in my committee, actually, because I am the chair of workforce development and small business, to talk about these same issues, is how making sure that those who are living these realities and out here get the compensation and the support that they need and the benefits that they deserve. So a lot of this work is also happening on the city and on the state level, and also trickling down from the federal level from the work that our Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley is doing. I will say just two things in terms of some of the work that our office has been really focused on, is looking how we support small businesses, immigrant-owned businesses. A lot of the issues that a lot of our folks have experienced in terms of having access to some of these federal loans and some of the state loans, and also even some of the city loans, is that it's access to information and to networks. So and also language barriers. So a lot of the information that came out, oftentimes it gets rolled out in English only, right? And unless you're connected and unless you have access to that dialogue, you're not going to know about those little coins that are available to you, right? So a lot of the stuff that we've been doing in our office is pushing for access to language, and not just translation and interpretation. We have to take that one step further. It's making sure that it's culturally responsive and that we're talking and communicating with people in ways that we understand. Whether you're speaking in English or in any other language, it has to be culturally responsive and appropriate to those that you are trying to reach, because otherwise the information is not going to trickle down. So it's not just even having access to the information, it's how are we communicating and outreaching to communities so that they can take advantage of this. Because by the time a lot of these businesses went to apply for whatever little crumbs were left, there was nothing left for them because it was too late.
Exactly.
So I think that
the big guys already devour everything.
That infrastructure has to be rebuilt and reorganized. And so a lot of the stuff that we have been doing is to help support small little local bodegas and convenience stores, and helping to stimulate the economy through small little initiatives so that we can help support and feed our people, but also do it in a way that's going to keep these little bodegas and corner stores up and running. You know, it's about creating opportunities to help feed our elders and working with small hyper local businesses to help provide food. But everything is a bureaucracy. Every time I presented an idea, I had to go through so many layers of red tape that I just decided to create a little family relief fund and work in partnership with another organization so that we can build our own capital to support these businesses, right? And I think that we need to really think about recovery in a way that's going to be equitable. But the only way we can do that is if we remove barriers. And there's too many barriers, too much red tape to move our people forward. And I think that is the type of stuff that COVID has done, is expose how difficult it is for businesses to thrive to begin with. And now what we do with that information and the type of bills that we pass forward, that's where the real work is going to come in.
Listen, ladies, I have gotten a few notes from the friends and who are actually telling me that I should see what you guys think on all of those. But my number one concern after COVID-19 is that the heroes who are at the bottom doesn't become zeros into our society again. So something has to be done to really relieve these people for their suffering and impact on how they sustain us during this COVID-19. You mentioned something which is very delicate. Sometimes people who are natives here in this country are having issues with the way things are being outreached to them. Never mind to those immigrants who speak a second language. So they are being, walking up on all the time and not paying any attention. So when you have folks in office who doesn't have that cultural competency in themselves, they could care less about the immigrant community. Now, here are some of the notes that I have gathered. There was a gentleman who says I should probably mention to you, and Nika probably know about this ITIN bill for safe community in terms of driving licenses, which would be very good for the immigrant community. Housing, affordable resources for educations. It's another thing that they wanted me to see whether that could, some change can be brought about. Basic protections for workers of color has been neglected totally. Working day and night to bring about solutions, strengthening the infrastructure of CBOs to continue to provide resources to our community. Recurring impact of gentrifications. Now, you know what was going on, what is going on, and what will be going on into the city in terms of gentrifications. And COVID-19 probably just put a dent on this for the moment. But however, there will be a lot of folks being facing issues such as they have to be kicked out of the house. There'll be banks that's going to be coming and start to get into the big fight with the mortgage that people owes them. So we got to ensuring a stability for rent control, resident property, secure affordable mortgage and rents, inequalities in the school system with a 5-year plan. That's one person says, with a 5-year plans, training more minority educators, providing necessary support to low income parents to help them with their educations too as well. So there is so much to be done. I don't think we can rest on our laurels. We're gonna have to fight. But however, shouldn't we bring the people with us with that fight? Because one of the things that I have noticed, once an elected officials get into office, they forgot for some reasons that if they were to bring the people together with them at every single fight possible, their chances of winning a lot more stronger than if they go into this battlefield by themselves.
So I'll touch on some of the state level policy, but first I want to say, A, people keep saying that. It is not true. So we were
Okay.
hearing for years that elected officials forget how to organize, and then a bunch of the people got elected by organizing. And
Okay.
Julie and I have been organizers. For example, the 2 elected officials you're talking to right now, we organize. Lydia Edwards organizes. Russell Holmes in his way organizes. The list goes on. I just picked a couple. Everybody's organizing and bringing the voices of their people. And even those who didn't feel empowered to, because of the group of elected officials of color that they might have had 10 years ago and the mixes at different times, everybody is organizing right now. So we got to stop blaming the electeds of color. There might be 1 or 2, I don't know, that secretly have fooled me, for example. But, Julie and I call it like it is. So does Rachel. So does Lydia. There's a bunch of like forthright people. And I think it would have been exposed if it was still happening. So we got to shift our mindset. The problem is we are all, including the electeds of color, an afterthought every single time anything gets done, including in this crisis, until somebody at the top feels like they politically need us for cover. And we use that to our advantage, but it is not enough. So anyway, that said, on the issues, again, and why I said that first, there is legislation on almost everything that was listed. So
Hmm.
the I-10 bill that was mentioned, which is like if you use a taxpayer ID number, just for listeners, instead of a social security number because you don't have one, maybe because you're not documented or for other reasons, to file your taxes. People with I-10s they're not eligible for the federal stimulus payments. And so there is a bill in the House with Christine Barber and in the Senate, I think with Jamie Eldridge, to get a stimulus payment to people who are I-10 holders. But again, it does not address the ongoing need for regular payments. I have a bill that would do that for all elders, including elders who 65 and older, because I'm on the Elder Affairs Committee. So I had asked the chair to co-file that with us, which she has. We're going to be pushing that, even though all elders are now covered, which they weren't when I drafted it in March. The CARES Act has covered everybody except for I-10 holders. And so we're keeping the bill forward without mentioning immigration in the bill, even though we know in the Elder Committee that's the only people that it now currently applies to. But so as not to
Right.
trigger, and working with a couple immigrant advocates that I brought in after it became essentially an immigration bill, which I normally wouldn't take the lead on. I always ask people who are immigrants and take their lead. And so I lean on Liz Miranda for a lot of that guidance because she has the closest experience of the first years there to that. Then with nonprofit and small business support, it goes together. There are a number of bills there to provide gap funding, that matches what the federal government did for those that got an unemployment insurance match as a nonprofit. So that's something, if you're a nonprofit leader, you would understand. You would get 50% of your employment insurance contribution, but you don't get the other 50% if you're not paying into it, the way that a business that does layoffs normally would do. So we have a bill to make that match. So those things are there. Education, a lot of legislators, even conservative legislators, relatively speaking, Democrats, are coming together around making sure the Student Opportunity Act money gets distributed fairly to the low-income school districts as was designated in the bill. The governor's budget did not do that. He has this. We have discretion because we have 7 years. So he shortchanged
Mm-hmm.
the first year for low-income school districts. So he gave. So if you divide it as 14% per year, right? If you just want to do it equally. So for special ed and even for English language learning, which is good and needs to be kept, and also for healthcare, he did the 14%. But for low-income school districts, he did 4%. Now, so we were already fighting that. The temptation when COVID comes is to say, well, we got to cut everything. No, we cannot cut our schools. They were already cut. We were already underfunding them at $1 billion a year. And so the voice of the people calling, and it can't just be Bostonians. Most of us people
Mm-hmm.
of color have big families or like family networks if they're not your blood relatives, and they live in other parts of the state. Those people need to be calling their white reps and telling them, Fund Student Opportunity Act. Don't only co-sponsor, call the speaker and ask him to take the hazard pay bill for a vote. The PPEs that you mentioned, not having the protection that our people need, again, we were an afterthought. So now the governor has responded to Russell Holmes and the Black and Latino Caucus and John Santiago, the doctor who's Latino and a state rep. He's responded and is now trying to figure out, and the mayor is trying to okay, let's make sure all of the communities of color are getting this stuff. But how many days, Julia, Jean-Claude, would we have needed after we heard the word pandemic to let people know this is going to hit communities of color hardest? 0 days.
Right.
We knew that as soon as we heard the word, we knew this is going to be bad for us. We knew that.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, city leaders were telling the mayor that from day one. It wasn't like nobody understood that people speak other languages. You know what I'm saying? It wasn't like nobody understood that our
Exactly.
essential workers were going to be low income immigrants and Black people. And so we have to figure out, myself included, how to make our collective voice unified and louder and more demanding.
True.
Because
True.
if my individual success as a legislator is dependent on me wheeling and dealing and building strong relationships with the very same people I need to come at with my left hand needs to slap them and my right hand needs to hug them, that doesn't work, right? So we got to figure out an overarching strategy. I celebrate the work of Black Economic Justice Institute for just as an example, and Shagun, because they start doing what some of these advocacy organizations do. They put out a whole plan, and we got to start putting out a vision for Black and Brown Boston, a vision for Black and Brown Massachusetts, that has all the components you've listed, Jean-Claude, and your
We are
listeners.
all in it
That
together.
says,
That's for sure.
here's what we should do, like Progressive Mass does for policy in general. They go right down education, healthcare, student loans, and higher ed. They go right down the list and they say, these are the policies we need. But we need also, on top of that, to say, these are the overarching goals: housing for all, healthcare for all. We're going to find and root out racial inequity in healthcare. If we had that as the top goal, small businesses first.
Mm-hmm.
It should be small businesses first. It should be immigrants first. If so we got to put the people that are struggling the most first. We can't be an afterthought. If we write that
In
out
other
together
words, there's a
somehow,
reform that needs to be done from the bottom up
right?
that
And
our
we got to
society is in
write
need
that
of.
down and make it plain. We got to make the vision plain, as the word says. I'm a devout person, and without a vision, the people perish. And so we need to
Yes.
stop bickering and pointing fingers at other people of color, and we need to write our stuff down, swallow our differences. Not every Black and Latino person is the same politically. Like, some are conservative, and that's okay. But we all agree that our people should have healthcare, housing, education, jobs, at the same level as everybody else, and that racism is holding us back. So we got to write that down, and we got to publicly together say it to the governor, to the mayor, because even if they agree, they don't know what to do. We got to show them how it is done.
Yep.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, let's give Julia a chance before we wrap up with one final goal that I have in mind. See whether we can help accomplish this. Go
I,
ahead, Julia.
I, I don't. I mean, I think that Nika, I'm not going to occupy space. I think that Nika, all of the bills, and she hit every point that I would make. She made. I would only urge people to really to underscore and help people recognize that we can't believe and expect that our elected officials are going to do everything. There's a role for everybody to play. And what we do is if we put all of our hopes and dreams and aspirations on elected officials and we don't see the role that we play, I mean, now I say, regular communities are not in positions of quote unquote power because that's perceived power, to be honest with you, because the real power lies within the people. And we need to start organizing ourselves and recognizing that we're the ones who we're the ones that put people in office, and we're the ones who could take them out. And I think that strategy around really recognizing who has your best interest in mind and who comes around your way when they're not in campaign mode, who's the one who continues to work and build. That is what these times require, is us really taking a real thorough assessment of what elected leadership looks like and changing the job description. It can't just be a dog and pony show during election time. It has to be about us rolling up our sleeves, working in coalition, working in collaboration, and building a tent where we're being informed by the people that are living the realities, and then going back into our offices and writing policies that address what we're learning out in these streets. That's not what usually happens. And I think that that's the type of leadership that we see now in office, is this collaborative and working in partnership with the advocates and the community organizers and the people like you, John, who are out here doing this work every single day in partnership with others, right? And I think that that's what's going to change the game, and that's how we're going to really be able to shift the world.
Everyone's going to have to do their own sacrifices to make things better for the livelihood of everyone. We are our brother's keepers. It is your obligations as well as mine to really bring comfort to our humanity in this time of misery. I am going to take the lead, and I sure hope you follow through as well. Thank you.